Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom, welcome back. Today's daf is Shekalim Daf Vav. We are right on top at the beginning of the Mishnah. Mas Nisan, Hamachanes Ma'os. One gathers some coins. He has a little savings account, a little piggy bank. He puts some coins in one at a time in preparation for his Machzas HaShekel. V'amar, and he announces before he begins gathering these coins, he says, Harei elu l'shikli, these are meant for my Machzas HaShekel, and it turns out that he ends up with more than he needs. He discovers that he has in excess of what is required for Machzas HaShekel. So what happens to that added, that extra money? The extra goes for Nadava, used for the Mizbeach. They would buy oilos for the Mizbeach. Why? Because although his real intention was to collect for the Machzas HaShekel, nevertheless, say Beis Shammai, this is discussed in the Gemara Nazir, that even Hegdish B'To'os, an inadvertent, unintentional Hegdish, has a din of Hegdish. Hegdish has its own powers. So even though he had no intention of adding to the required amount, but since he made a blanket announcement, he says Harei elu l'shikli, without specifying that anything beyond Machzas HaShekel amount will not be Kodesh. Hegdish is applied even in this case, and therefore anything beyond the Machzas HaShekel amount goes l'nadava. Ubisel oimrim moisron chulin, the leftover is chulin. Hegdish b'toos, that's not Hegdish. And all he really wanted to do was to be Magdish the amount needed for Machzas HaShekel, no more. Therefore the leftover is chulin. She'avi mehen shikli. What if he switched around the wording? He's gathering together some coins, and he says, my shekel will be brought from these. So he switched around the term here. Instead of these are for my shekel, she'avi mehen, from them, from these coins, from this fund, I will supply my Machzas HaShekel. In this case, all agree, shavin shamoiser chulin, the leftover, meaning any amount in excess of Machzas HaShekel is chulin. He clearly said, I only want to be Magdish what I need for the Machzas HaShekel. It's as though he conditioned it. He made it tonight. Only that amount is Kaddish and the rest not. Continues the Mishnah with a similar case regarding gathering money in preparation to purchase a Karban Chatas. So he's gathering some coins, a penny, a nickel, a dime at a time, and he says, Elu l'chatasi. These are designated for the purchase of my chatas. Shavin shamayser nadav. In this case, all agree. Anything that's left over, anything he doesn't need for the chatas, has kedusha. It goes l'nadava. The Gemara soon will explain why. The point is that a chatas doesn't have a predetermined value. There's no set amount. You can purchase a expensive chatas. So really, every coin in that piggy bank has potential kedusha. Unlike Machzas HaShekel, which is a set amount. Here, we don't have that rationale. Therefore, everything has kedusha, and anything that he doesn't actually need goes l'nadava. That's because he says, Elu l'chatasi. What if he says, She'avi mehen chatasi? I'm gathering these coins so that I can use them to purchase my chatas from them. Oh, here all agree, there's no concern. Shavin shamayser chulin. All agree that the leftover, the unneeded amount is chulin, because once again he switched around the terms. Instead of these are for my chatas, he says I'm going to purchase my chatas from these, indicating that he only wants to be magdish what is needed. So we have two cases. When he says she'avi mehen, I'll bring my shekel or my chatas from these coins, all agree anything unneeded is chulin. However, if he says harei elu, then it depends. Harei elu l'chatasi, anything that he doesn't need is an adava. But harei elu l'shikli, according to Beis Shammai, the excess amount is kaddish because it's a hegdish b'tos. According to Beis Hillel, the leftover is chulin. So why do we have this difference between chatas? We all agree Hari elu lechatasi, leftovers nadava. And by shekel, we have a shaila. According to Beis Hillel, we say, it's not what he had in mind. He only wanted to be magish the required amount, the leftover schulin. Why that difference between shekel, where it's schulin, and chatas, where it's kaddish? Amar Rabbi Shimon, very simple. Ma ben shkolim lechatas. Why is there a difference between shekel and chatas? Ela shel shkolim yesh len kitzvah, because shkolim have a set amount. That's all he wanted to be magdish. The machtas are shekel. Therefore, the rest is chulin, according to Beis Hillel. But the chatas ain't lo kitzvah. The chatas doesn't have a set amount. It fluctuates. You can buy a very expensive animal. So technically, every coin in this savings account is roy for chatas and can have kedusha. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he disagrees with this rationale. He says, shkolim have no fluctuation? And perhaps Rabbi Yehuda is coming to explain Beis Shammai's approach. Why? By Hara'elu l'shikli, Beis Shammai say that the moisar is nadava. Says Rabbi Yehuda, I maintain that even shkolim sometimes can fluctuate. After shkolim ein lohen kitzvah. Even by shkolim there's no set amount. Because although all of Yisrael had to give the same amount, but whatever that amount is, it fluctuated based on the history, meaning at different points in history, they established different types of amounts. And therefore, technically, all the coins in this savings account can be used for the machzas hashekel. It has potential kedusha if they should so decide to increase the amount of machzas hashekel. As he explains, when Yisrael returned from Gullus and they were in dire need of funds for the building of Beis Hamikdash, so they instituted a very high tax. All of Yisrael were required to give darkonis, which were those gold coins we discussed yesterday, which actually have 2 slime in them. It's 4 times machzas hashekel. Right? Each sela, the commonly used currency sela, had 2 shkolim, commonly used shkolim, meaning in the Lashonis of Chazal, it was a sela which had 2 shkolim, but the shekel shel Torah equals the sela. Right? A shekel shel Torah is worth double today's shkolim, so shekel shel Torah equaled a sela. A machzas shekel shel Torah equaled a half a sela. They donated darkonis. A darkon is 2 slime. That was initially when they needed lots of money. Chazru lishkol slime. Then, when the coffers filled up, they went down to slime. It's still more than a machzas shekel. A sela is 2 machzas shekels. So that's what they all gave. A sela a person. Chazru lishkol tivin. Later on, they bumped it down to tivin. Tivin are actually a half a sela. Half a sela, it's a machzas hashekel. Bikshu likshol dinrin. Then they wanted to go down even further. A dinar per person, which is half of a machzas hashekel. Because a sela is a shekel shel Torah. A sela has 4 dinar. A machzas hashekel shel Torah is a half a sela, which has 2 dinar. And they wanted to go down to 1 dinar a person. So it started darkoines, 2 slime. Next step was a sela, which has 4 dinar. It went down to a half a sela, which is a machzas shekel, 2 dinar. And they wanted to go down even further, to dip down below machzas shekel, 1 dinar per person. Chacham didn't accept it. You can't dip down below the minimum requirement of a machzas shekel shel Torah. You can increase if you want, and therefore you couldn't go below and give dinar. In any case, Rabbi Yehuda is making a point. We see that even machzas shekel fluctuated throughout different points of history. Amar Rabbi Shimon, still, you can't compare to chatas. Ava became yad kul and shava. Even when they instituted all these various taxes and different amounts, but it was a set fee for all, equally. So when he's gathering these mois for the shekel, he knows what he's getting himself into. He knows that it's going to be what everyone else is giving today. It's not an unknown, an undetermined amount. Aval chatas, when it comes to chatas, it's an unknown. Depending on your generosity. This fellow will bring a chatas worth a sela. Maybe b'shtayim, the other one will bring one worth 2 slime. Maybe b'shalish, the other one will bring one worth 3 slime. Depending on your generosity and your level of tshuva. In any case, chatas is different than shekel. Chatas is, in its very essence, an unknown, an undetermined value. And therefore, says Reb Shimon, we understand why when he says, Hari'elu lichatasi, anything left over after purchasing that chatas isn't a davar, because potentially the entire content of that savings account could have been applied and was designated for chatas. Therefore, the leftover is kaddish. Whereas by shkalim, it's different. There's a preset amount. Anything beyond that was not what he had in mind. Therefore, according to Beis Hillel, it's a hegdish betos and it's chulin. Says the Gemara, Machanes v'chul. Rabbi Yosi, b'shem Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Yosi said in the Shem Rabbi Lezer, Ma pligin. When does the machlekes in the Mishnah apply? Machlekes between Sham and Beis Hillel. But Machanes proitret, when he's gathering a prutis, one coin at a time, and it turns out that he has more than he needs. Aval ba'omer elu l'shikli. But suppose he takes a scoop. He scoops out a handful of coins from his treasure chest, and he says, elu l'shikli. In that case, kol amal moidi. Everybody agrees. Shamoisru nedava. Even Beis Hillel agree that the leftover, meaning whatever is there in excess of the masa shekel, is nedava. Why? Because unlike this fellow who's gathering coin at a time, he doesn't know what's going on. He's caught by surprise when he finds more than he needs. In that case, Beis Hillel says hegdish b'tos, and it's not hegdish. But here, he took a scoop. He knows there's a good chance there's more than he needs, and he didn't hesitate to say elu l'shikli, which shows that he wants the entire content of his hands to be full, to be kaddish, and therefore moiser nadav. That's the first approach. Rabbi Yosi, the Shem Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Chia, Rav Beva, B'Shem Rabbi Lezer, they have a different approach, a different version of Rabbi Lezer's opinion. Just the opposite. Ma pligin. In what case is there a machlokes? When does the machlokes in our Mishnah apply? B'mechanes proitret, when he's gathering coins. Aval ba'imar elu shikli, but if he takes a scoop and he says elu shikli, kula alma, they all agree. Shamoisron chulin, that the leftover is chulin. Why? They adopted a different approach. They say, look, when he's gathering a coin at a time, so he doesn't know what's going on, and when he announced it's for my shekel, the announcement applied to the entire thing. But in this case, where he takes a scoop and he knows full and well that there might be extra money here, and all he wants is to be mekadosh to masa shekel. That's the purpose of him scooping that money. So his hegdish only applies to what he needs for machzas shekel, and not beyond that. So we have two opinions on both sides of the spectrum. According to the first approach, scooping is worse, because he's holding money, he's saying, this is my shekel, knowing that there might be extra there. Evidently, he intended on being machzas the entire thing. The second version takes it to the other extreme. No, just the opposite. Taking a scoop of money, knowing that there might be extra. In that case, we say, no, he's cognizant, he's aware of what he's doing, and he only wants to be managed what he needs. So let's stop for a second. We have three cases so far. We have a case where he says, Sha'avi mehen, I'm going to use this pile of money, I'm going to purchase from this echatas, from this my shekel. All agree, only thing that is kaddish is what he actually needs. When he is saving up coins, and he says Hari'elu, so Hari'elu chatasi, it's all really suitable for the chatas. Well, the chatas doesn't have a set amount, therefore the entire thing is kaddish. Hari'elu shikli v'machlekes. B'Shammai say the excess is kaddish. Hegdish v'tos have a hegdish. Still say no. Hegdish v'tos is not hegdish. Now we have a third case in the Gemara. He took a scoop of money. We have two approaches. Either all agree the leftover is chulin, that's not what he had in mind, or perhaps all agree the excess is nadava, because his announcement applied to the entire scoop. Amar Rav Chia masnisa Messiah l'Rav. Our Mishnah supports Rav Bevi, who holds that what? That when you have a scoop, the extra is chulin. This not. Amar Rav Shimon, ma ben shkolim lachatas. Why is there a difference between shkolim and chatas? By chatas we say the extra is Nadava. By Shkolim we say the extra is Chulin. And the Gemara is assuming that we're speaking about a scoop. We're going to see soon. So what's the difference? Shkolim have a set amount, and therefore anything in excess of the amount is Chulin. Well, the Chatas no Kitzvah doesn't have a set amount, therefore the entire thing is an Nadava. Says the Gemara, Manan Kayaman. What are we speaking about? What's the case that he's coming to address? That he says, I'm going to bring my shekel from these. There's no discussion there. All agree. The leftover is Chulin. If he says, I'm going to bring my chatas from these, all agree. Here as well, the leftover is Chulin. As we just discussed now, Mishnah. Shavim indicates that he's conditioning it. Only what I need, what I absolutely need is Kaddish. So we have no difference between Shkolim and Chatas in that regard. Apparently Rav Shimon is not coming to address that case. Apparently we're speaking about the following case. When he scoops up a handful of coins and he says, these are for my Shkolim. And there we see a difference between Shekel and Chatas. Shkolim, when he's gathering and saving for the Matzah Shekel, which has a set amount, we say, only the required amount is Kaddish and the rest not, according to Beis Hillel, because that's not what he had in mind. In any case, we see, the Gemara is assuming that we're speaking about a scoop of coins. And we say Meisoron Chulin. Anything beyond what's needed is Chulin. As opposed to Chatas, when he scoops up for the sake of a Chatas, over there we say, since Minatur there's no set amount there, you can bring as expensive as a Chatas as you want. Moiser and a Dava, the leftovers in Dava. So you have a Raya. To which Shita? To Rabbeva, B'Shem Rabbi Lazar, who says, if you have a scoop of money, and you say, Hara'elu Shikli, the leftover is Chulin. Says, if that's the case, then we have a kasha on the other version. Rabbi Yosef, in the name of Rabbi Lezer, who said that when you have a scoop, the leftover is Nadava. We have a kasha from our Mishnah, which indicates that the leftover is Chulin. My Avadla, Rabbi Yosef, B'Shem Rabbi Lezer, what's he going to do with the Mishnah? Patala, he's going to interpret the Mishnah by Mekanis Preitrit. He didn't take a handful of money. We're speaking that he gathered one coin at a time. It could be Silel. And Rav Shimon is simply explaining Beis Hillel's Shita. That's not the topic of our discussion. We're speaking about taking a handful of coins. That's not what Rav Shimon is speaking about. He's referring back to the Mishnah of Hamekanis Mois. He's gathering one coin at a time. It turns up that there's more than he needs. In that case, we still say anything in excess of the required amount is Hegdish B'Tos and considered Chulin. Rav Shimon is addressing that. Why by shekel do we say it's Chulin? Because we're speaking about something which has a predetermined amount. And he had no intention of being Mekadosh more. Whereas by Chatos, which has no set amount, even something which was unused is Nadava. Says more another kasha, but Tanir, we learned in the next Mishnah, Moiser Shkolim Chulin. Leftover monies by Matzah Shekel is called Chulin. The Gemara is assuming once again we're speaking about a handful of money. Leftovers are Chulin. That's a kasha on the first version of Shem Rabbi Lezer, that leftovers in this handful of money is Nadav. Potter law, he interprets it once again, but Mechanis Breitrit, Gbesil. We're not speaking about scooping out a handful of coins. We're speaking about gathering, saving up one coin at a time. It turns out there's more than he needs. Yeah, in that case, that's different. He didn't expect it. It's Hegdish B'Tos, and it's Chulin. Continues the Gemara after the parenthesis. Hamar for Shikle. Suppose he designated a shekel for his Matzah shekel. V'savar shu chayv. He figured that he's chayv to give. V'nimtza she'ein chayv. It turns out that he's not chayv. His father-in-law gave a shekel on his behalf. So the whole thing was a mistake. Loi Kaddish, the whole thing doesn't become Kaddish. Why? Even according to Beis Shammai, that hold that a Hegdish B'Tois works. But here, he's not a Bar Chiv. He's not a candidate for Matzah shekel. He is not chayv. and therefore he cannot generate machzas hashekel. We have another case. Hamafresh shnayim. He was mafresh 2 separate coins, a double machzas shekel. He thought for some reason that he owes 2. V'sava shu chayev shtayim. He thought that he's chayev shnayim. V'nimtza she'en chayev echad. It turns out he only chayev 1. Oisa sheni maya avidla. This second one, maya avidla. What should he do with it? Is it chulin? Is it nadava? It says the Gemara nishma ana min hadava. We can bring a raya from the following halacha, which is very similar to this one, concerning a korban chatas. Hifresh chatosai. He was mafresh korban chatas. V'sava shu chayev. He thought he ate chaylev. He has to bring a chatas. V'nimtza she'en chayev. It turns out that he's not chayev. Lo yikadsha, the korban is not kaddish. It was it never started to begin with. Hifresh shtayim. He was mafresh 2 chatois. He thought he ate chaylev and dam. He needs 2 korbanos. V'sava shu chayev shtayim. He thought he needs 2. V'nimtza she'en chayev l'achas. It turns out that he's only chayev 1. Oisa shniya mat avela. What do you do with the second korban? Eloraya. You let it roam and pasture until it gets a mum, and you sell it, you take the money, and you apply it for the Nadav and Beis HaMikdash. So just as we know that this halacha applies to the extra chatas, hachanami, elul Nadav, here as well, when he was mafresh a double portion of machzas shekel, the second one goes in the Nadav. Use it to purchase the oilers for the Mizbeach. The more figures it's a good equation. We compare machzas shekel to the chatas. The Gemara responds by saying, not necessarily. V'koi, here, heich, how? Oimer, ata how do you say this? Meaning, perhaps there's a way to differentiate that by shekel, anything beyond what you need is called moisar, or perhaps called chulin. It's different than a chatas, where each chatas on its own is a separate korban. You don't know which one to use, which one not. Therefore, one works and the other one is an adav. Both have kedusha. Whereas by money, perhaps adding more than you need is just called adding more money. It's not called 2 separate machzas shekels. But actually, the Rambam paskins, like this Gemara, that when one is mafresh 2 machzas shekels simultaneously, they're both kaddish. Look, each one is a machzas shekel. Which one are you going to expel? Which one are you going to delete? So each one has power. And therefore the Rambam says, use one for your machzas shekel, and the other one is also kaddish and used for nadava. So in conclusion, we had 5 cases. He was mafresh a shekel. Turns out that he's not chayiv to give that shekel. That money is chulin. He was mafresh 2 at a time. The second one is nadava. He gathers together coins and he says, I'm going to bring my shekel from these. I'm going to bring my chatas from these. Anything that's unneeded is chulin. He collects some money and he says, Hari elu, for chatas, the leftovers in the nadava, because a chatas can be very expensive. And therefore everything there can potentially be applied and attributed to kedushas chatas. If he says, Hari elu, for my shekel, I have machlokes. V'shama say, the leftovers in the nadava, because it's hegdish b'tos, and that's hegdish. But still say it's chulin. Hegdish b'tos is not hegdish. If he scooped up a handful of money and he said, Hari elu, for my shekel, we have 2 versions of the Gemara. According to one approach, the leftovers nadava. According to the other approach, the leftovers achul. Continues the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and he related the story that throughout history they actually tinkered with the amount of the machzas shekel. It started with darkonis, went down to slime, to tivin, to dinrin. It says the more darkonis, those are dinrin, those are gold coins, which have a value of 2 sela. Chazru lishkol silin, they went down to slime. What is that? Kishmon. As we know today, a sela. Chazru lishkol tivin, they went down to tivin. What's a tivin? Palgi silin, half selas, which is really a machzas shekel. Bikshu lishkol dinrin, they wanted to dip down 1 dinar per person. That's a half of a shekel. That's too little. Kroten. The Taklan Chadin says kroten is like quartin, like a quarter of a gallon. So they wanted to give a quarter of a sela. A sela has 4 dinar. They wanted to give 1 dinar per person. And they didn't accept it, because you can add to the machzas shekel of the Torah, but you can't deduct. At a minimum, you must give a machzas shekel, which are 2 dinar, half a sela. Because of the following pasuk, what do we say? They didn't accept it. The madno aleinu, we accepted, we established upon ourselves, mitzvah is let's say shlish shekel rishana, to give a shlish shekel, so a third of a shekel in those days were like a half a shekel today. Shlish shekel rishana la'avodas v'selkeinu, for the Beis Hamikdash. So they couldn't dip down below a half a shekel. Reb Chalke b'shem Reb Acha said like this: Mikan, from this pasuk we learn, we have a drasha to teach us how they would do the Trumas Halishka. We learned back in Daf Beis, 3 times a year, they would go into the room with the shkolim and separate a certain amount. And we're going to see Be'ez Hashem later on in the Masechta, they would take kupos, these boxes, these containers. 3 of them, each container would hold 3 sa'ah. So it's 3 times 3, meaning 3 times a year, they would take a Trumas Halishka, which involved 3 boxes, 3 containers. Each Trumas Halishka required 3 containers, and each container contained amount of 3 sa'ah. The fact that the pasuk here says shlish is hashekel b'shana, this is a drasha remez. Shlish is like 3 times 3. Mikan shetzarich adam l'shalish. Actually, sorry, it's going to be the next gemara. Where first he learns a halacha like this: Shlishis teaches us 3 times. Mikan shetzarich adam l'shalish shikloi gimel pam b'shana. From here we learn that a person should give tzedakah 3 times a year. Some of Farshim say this has to do with the Yamim Tovim, to supply the poor people 3 times a year. Mikan she'em atrichin al tzibur. From here we learn that we don't burden the public. We don't make more than 3 appeals a year. Yoisem megimel pam b'shana. That's what we learn from Shlishis. It's thrice yearly. 3 appeals, 3 donations. Here comes that Gemara is referring to. Amar Abin, from the fact that it says Shlishis, which sounds like 333, we learn Mikan legimos in, that each container used by the Trumas Halishka contained an amount of 3 sa'ah. Mikan l'shalosh kupos. During each one of those Trumas Halishka, before Pesach, before Sukkot, before Shavuos, they used 3 containers. Mikan l'gam la'afroshes, that this took place 3 times a year. So 3 afroshes a year. Each afrosha required 3 containers. Each one of those containers contained 3 sa'ah. Ksiv zayitnu kol ha'ovel ha'pkudim. This is the pasuk telling us about the mitzvah machzah shekel. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemya interpreted the pasuk, they applied it differently. Chad Omar, one said like this: Lefisha chotu b'machzas hayom. Why is a machzas shekel given? Because Klal Yisrael committed the chet of egel by chatzos. Yitnu machzas shekel. To be mechaper, they give a half a shekel. V'chad Omar, and the other one said, we have a Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemya. So one said, half a shekel corresponds to the egel which took place by chatzos. Half for half. V'chad Omar, the other one explained, Lefisha chotu b'sheishoy, since they sinned at the point of 6 hours, which is chatzos, just a different way of saying it. So the number 6 is highlighted. Shechotu b'sheishoyos b'yem, yitnu machzas shekel. Therefore they have to give a machzas shekel. The avad shita garmeisen. Garmeisen are these coins in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. So machzas shekel contains 6 garmeisen to correspond to the chet that took place at 6 hours in a day. Rabbi Yeshua Bey, the son of Rabbi Nechemya, b'shem, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, explains us this. V'isha overall aseres hadibris, because Yisrael did the egel of the zar, which is shakul kineged kla Torah kula. In effect, they will over on the aseres hadibris, which is the formula which contains the entire Torah. So on account of that, they have to be mechaper and have to give a machzah shekel. Yenoisen kol echad ve'echad asara gera. A full shekel has 20 gera. The Torah says this. So a half a shekel has 10 gera. 10 gera to be mechaper on the aseres hadibris. Rab Rachya and Rab Levi said in the name of B'Shem Rab Shimon Lakish, Levisha machru b'chorish al Rachel. The Shvatim sold Yosef. They sold the firstborn, the B'chor of Rachel. And how much did they get paid for it? Be'esrim kesef. They took 20 kesef, 20 dinar in exchange. So the mechaper on that, a father has to redeem his son, his B'chor, as b'nai b'chorah be'esrim kesef, by paying this amount. 20 kesef means 20 dinarim. Each cell has 4 dinarim. That's why we give 5 slime by Pedin Ben. 5 slime contain 20 dinar, 20 kesef to be mechaper from Mechiras Yosef. Rab Pinchas b'shem Rab Levi explains as follows: Levisha machur b'chorish Rachel be'esrim kasav, because he sold Yosef for 20 coins. V'nafal l'chol echad ve'echad mehem, and each shevet's portion comes out to how much? How many shvatim were there? Only 10. Reuven was by Yaakov Avinu, and Binyamin wasn't there. So we really only have 10 shvatim involved. Now the Takan Chantin says, well, Yosef wasn't involved. He says he was. Listen to this lashon, all on the bottom of the page. He says, "V'Yosef gamkin haya hagurim." He was also a gurim. Because of the jealousy that he generated initially, so he's also somewhat held accountable. It's a big chiddush. Some learn differently, that Yosef is not part of the equation, but Reuven is, because he was still involved. He was there initially. He spoke about putting him to the bar, so he's held accountable. In any case, we have 10 shvatim who received 20 coins. Now, if you take 20 coins divided by 10, we have 2 dinar per person. That's called tivin, right? Tivin, there's two dinarim. So, each one of those 10 shvatim, part in the 20 coins is 2 coins, which is a machzah shekel. That's why each one of Yisrael has to give a machzah shekel, which they have for Selah, which is 2 dinarim, which is tiva. So we have several remazim for machzah shekel, whether it's a half a shekel, keneged the egel, which took place at Chatzois midday, a half a shekel, which contains 6 garmesim, to correspond to the 6th hour of the day, contains 10 gera, corresponding to the Aseres HaDibros, or the machzah shekel contains 2 dinar, which is the amount that each shevet received for selling it. Says the Mishnah, Meiser Shkol Mechulim. If you have leftover money from the Machzah Shekel fund, it's Chulin, as we explained in the previous sugya. Meiser Asir Seifa, you have leftover from the Asir Seifa, which the Gemara will explain. Or we have a whole long list of leftovers. Now, the term Meiser, leftover, can have several meanings. It can mean that he prepared monies for these purposes and he has some leftover. It can mean that he was mafresh to carbon and they got lost, he was mafresh another one, they found the first one. So he had a double carbon. So there's several variations of Meiser. What do you do with Meiser? Meiser, kinei zav, and kinei are the pair of birds, which a zav would use for his kapara. Kinei zavais, the kinei yoldois, chatois vashamois, all these leftovers. Meiser and Nadava are applied for Nadava, used for the oilois on the Mizbeach. Zaklal, this is the general rule. Kol shu balashem chatos, umeshem ashma, any carbon, chatos and asham, Meiser and Nadava, the leftover is Nadava. Meiser oila, if you have some leftover funds from your oila fund, lo'ila, use it for your next oila. Meiser mincha, if you have leftover by the mincha, lemincha, use it for mincha. Meiser shlamim, l'shlamim. We have one exception. Meiser pesach. A pesach, as we explained in Mesechus Pesachim, is a subcategory of shlamim. We're going to see in the Gemara, there's a pasuk for this. A pesach is very closely related to shlamim. Therefore, Meiser ha-pesach, if you have leftover pesach, l'shlamim, it's directed for shlamim use. Meiser Nazirim, there was a collection throughout town to supply the karbanos of the Nazirim. The Nazirim use the extra money for the next batch of Nazirim. Meiser Nazir, if you have some left over from your own Nazir fund, the Nadava, directed for Nadava. Omar B'Yossi, ad da'anot hamana, while I was there in Bavel, Shamis, I heard Kal, a voice. Rabbi Yehuda Shal Shmuel. I really asked Shmuel as follows: what's going to be in a case where Hirfrish Shiklei Umeis? He was mafresh his machzah shekel coin and he passed away. What do you do with it? Amarlei, Yiplu Nadava, use it for Nadava. Next question. Moisar Asir Se'eva Shaloi. What about a Kohen Gadol? He brings a daily mincha called Minchas Chavitim, something unique to the Kohen Gadol, which was made from 1/10 of ephah of flour. He prepared a bit too much. He has left over. What do you do? You can't use it tomorrow. It's been designated for today. So what do you do with it? Rabbi Yechon Amar, Yolichem Liyam HaMelech. Take it to the Dead Sea. Don't have enough from it. You cannot use it for anything else. Rabbi Lezer Amar, Yiplu Nadava. Use it for Nadava because, as the Gemara Menachos explains, according to Rabbi Lezer, the Minchas Chavitim, the Kohen Gadol, is referred to in the Torah as a chatas, a form of chatas. What happens to the moiser of chatas? We learned in the Mishnah, it goes on Nadava. Therefore, the moiser of the Asiris Eif of Kohen Gadol, according to Rabbi Lezer, goes on Nadava. Masnis a pligal Rabbi Yechon. Our Mishnah seems to be inconsistent to Rabbi Yochanan. What does the Mishnah say? Moiser shkolim is chulin. And then Mishnah says Moisa Asir Seifa, which the Gemara presumes is referring to the Kohen Gadol's mincha. And then we go through the whole list of Moisres which go in a dava, and Asir Seifa as well goes in a dava. So it's a kasha Rabbi Yochanan. Moisa Kinei Zava, Mekinei Zavas, Moisa Kinei Yoldes, Chatais Vashamis, Moisa in a dava. Ma Avad La Rabbi Yochanan. What's Rabbi Yochanan do with this Mishnah? Pasala, he interprets it as follows: Moisa Asir Seifa Shel Minchas Chayte Shel Kol Yisrael. You know that a Mitzvah, when he was poor, he would bring a mincha, minchas chayte. He's called a chayte because it's on account of an aver. So that's what the Mishnah is referring to. A minchas chayte, that's certainly a variety of it's part of the chatas species. And a moiser of a chatas goes on a dava. Of course, I agree with that. I'm disagreeing regarding the minchas chavitin, the asir seif of kohen gadol. That I maintain goes liyam melech. So in summary, if there's leftover from shkolim, it goes lechulin. If you have leftover from chatas, asham, nazar, or all those kalbanis, the kinizam and zavais mentioned in the Mishnah, the moiser is nedava. Moiser of Pesach, that's unique. That's used for shlamim. The leftover of the asir seif of kohen gadol, we have machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan says yam melech, and Rabbi says has a din of moiser chatas and goes on nedava. Continues the Gemara. Rabbi Yossi Omar, he said as follows: Al do olu. On this, olu means he complained. He asked. Abba Barba, that was his name. He was actually the father of Shmuel. So he asked like this: the Irun Amran, they over there in Babel, they say like this: Menayin Shah Pesach Mishtan L'Shem Shlomim. But when do we learn that a Pesach can be converted to a Shlom? Speaking obviously, it's not on the Yudal Nisan. It's Shloi Bizmanai. Whether before Pesach or after Pesach, we're going to learn from the pasuk that a Pesach can be diverted to Shlomim. How do we know this? We learn from here that any Pesach, which comes from Tzayin, right? Tzayin is actually a father category. It includes two types. It's the light animals, the animals which can be either goats or sheep. So tzayin includes goats and sheep, which can be used, either one can be used for Korban Pesach. Kol shu min tzayin, any korban, such as a Korban Pesach, which can be brought from tzayin, any type of tzayin, goats, sheep, ba shlomim, can also be turned into a shlom. So this is the makar that a Pesach can be turned into a shlom. Of course, we're speaking that he's not doing the shchita l'shem Pesach. It's on Tu B'Shvat. If he does l'shem Pesach, it's possible. Rather, he's doing the shchita for a shlomim, as we're going to see soon in the Gemara. In which case, since the Pesach is out of its zman, shloi b'zmanoi, we learn from this pasuk, a Pesach reverts to shlom. Hey, Seva, the Bnei Yeshiva asked like this: why are you applying this strictly to the Pesach? A Pesach, which comes from Tzayin, can be turned into a Shlom. Hari Oila Minat Tzayin. Oila also comes from Tzayin. And therefore, perhaps an Oila can also be turned into a Shlom. Answers the Gemara, no. The Pasuk speaks about something which can only be brought from Tzayin. Pesach can only be brought from goats or sheep. It cannot be brought from heavy animals like cows or bulls. Davar she'ena ba'ela minat tzayin. The pasuk is specifically directed at Pesach, which can only be brought from tzayin. Yatzis oila, as opposed to an oila, she bafil when a barker. You can even use a heavy animal for it, and therefore, that's not what the pasuk is speaking about. Hey, Seva, they further asked, Hari Asham. Perhaps the pasuk is referring to Asham as well, which cannot be brought from bakar. Only a ram, a more mature sheep, can be used for the asham. So perhaps the pasuk, which tells you that minat tzayin can be turned into a shlamim, is referring to asham as well. Amar Abun Barkana minat tzayin. Pasuk says v'im minat tzayin, indicating that this is only applicable to Pesach, for which you can use all types, all varieties of tzayin, sheep, goats. Davar shuba mikol atzayin. So min is inclusive. All types of tzayin supply this carbon. Yatsa asham, as opposed to asham, she'ena ba element el mavad. He's very limited. You can only make an asham from an ayil, a ram. So that's not what the pasuk is referring to. The pasuk that says you can turn the carbon into a shlam, evidently speaking only about Pesach, which you can make from a goat or a sheep. All types of tzayin. Says in 1 second, min hatzayin is all inclusive, all types of tzayin. B'chol asar, all over you say, at amar you say, min, when we have the word min, it's coming to exclude. As we find all over Shas, min is an exclusionary term. V'kanat amar, v'kanat mar is like amar. And here you say just the opposite, min l'rabbis. Min is an inclusive term, all types of tzayin. Amar of mana, hachinami min l'mayit. Here as well, min is actually coming to exclude something. V'imin atzayin means all forms of tzayin, all forms of light animals, sheep, goats. But within these types, we have some restrictions as far as age and gender. Miut she'ena ba ben shtei shanim. A Pesach must be within a year. If it's past a year, it's puzzle. Miut she'ena ba ben nekeva. You can only bring it tzayin zachar, but not nekeva. So v'imin atzayin means all types of tzayin, and that's only applicable to Korban Pesach. Not oila, which comes from bakar. Not asham, which is only a ram. So evidently it's only referring to Korban Pesach. The min is excluding age or gender-related variations. And certainly that is consistent with the Korban Pesach. So again, we learn from a pasuk that a Korban Pesach at times can be diverted to shlamim if it's shalei b'zman. Okay, the Vilna Gaon deletes the next line. And let's begin from the word bilvad on the next line. Hey Sivan. So they further asked further, another kasha. V'aksiv v'manat soin karbanai. Min akvasim amina izim la'oila. We have another pasuk. The carbon that comes minat soin is la'oila. Okay, so based on your approach, let's dash in this pasuk as follows. Moisra pesach ba'oila. V'manat soin, meaning a leftover pesach, which comes from tsoin, is designated for oila. How do you know it's going to be diverted to shlamim? Maybe oila instead. Says, okay, we have two options. What is the Moiser Pesach going to turn into? An shlamim, as in the first pasuk, or an oila, as in the second pasuk? Which one do we prefer? Amar Rabbi Abun, Mishan and Dava Shulachila. We rather switch and divert and convert a Pesach which is designated for achila. That's the whole purpose of the Korban Pesach, to eat the avodah zarah of the mitzvah. So we rather take that which is royal achila and turn it into something else that's meant for achila, like a shlam, l'dava shul achila. Ein mishanen, but we don't switch dava shul achila, a Pesach which is meant for achila, l'dava she'en achila, to something which is not meant for achila, such as an oil. So we convert edible to edible rather than edible to inedible. That's why we prefer the first approach. Pesach will be turned into a shlamim. Another pshat. Why do we favor shlamim over oila? Mishan kachim kalam, l'shem kachim kalam. We prefer switching the Pesach, which is within the kachim kalam category, to another form of kachim kalam, shlamim. Ve'en mishan kachim kalam, l'shem kachim kachim. Rather than converting the Pesach, which is a kachim kalam, to oila, which is an entirely different category of kachim kachim. Okay, so at this point we learned from a pasuk, a Pesach, out of its prescribed time, whether before Yom Tov, after Yom Tov, can be converted into a shlam. Now, if you did the shchita, shalei b'zmanei, on Tu B'Shvat, l'shem Pesach, of course it's possible, because you can't have a Pesach now. The only time it's kosher is, let's say it's a week before Pesach. So he has to have in mind, this is not a Pesach. It's something else, and that's how it become a shlamim. Shaloi l'shmoi, doing the avodah for a different purpose, a purpose other than the Pesach, that is what actually helps it out. It uproots its Pesach status. It pulls it out of the Pesach realm, and now, by default, it falls into the Shlamim category, as we just mentioned in the Gemara. Continues the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Al do olil Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina had the following problem. He complained, he asked, the Inun Amr, because they in Bavel say, in a Pesach Mishtan L'Shem Shlamim. The only time a Pesach reverts to Shlamim is if he had that in mind. Elam ken shachte L'Shem Shlamim. If the Shechita was L'Shem Shlamim, that's when the Pesach turns into Shlamim. You have to have that positive element, that positive application. You have to apply the Shlamim status to it for it to become a Shlamim. It doesn't happen on its own. Vani oimer I, is Rabbi Chanina speaking, I say, no. Afilu shachtu l'shem oila. You don't have to have a machshava l'shem shlamim. The Torah says, a Pesach shlei bizman, which was done shaloi l'shmoi, not for the sake of Pesach, is automatically a shlamim. So even if you had a machshava l'shem oila, that's okay, as long as it wasn't l'shem Pesach. Because the shlamim status is not applied by you. You're not a boss of this carbon. You don't have the right to divert it. The Torah says, a Pesach shli bizmaneh. If it's not L'Shem Pesach, it's automatically a Shlamim. So as long as he didn't have Pesach in mind, that is enough to make it a Shlamim. So they held, you have to actively pursue the Shlamim element here. You have to apply the Shlamim aspect for it to become a Shlamim. He said, no, as long as you remove the Pesach element, by default, it falls into a Shlamim. Amar Bila, time of the Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan's reason is as follows. All you need is to uproot the Pesach designation. That's all. That automatically turns into a Shlamim. The pasuk says, "Im minat zayin karbani lezevach shlamim." We learn from here, Kol shu zevach bo shlamim. As long as you had any carbon in mind during the shechita of this Pesach, just not Pesach, any other carbon in mind, oila, shlamim, it automatically turns into shlamim. Okay. Says the Gemara, umishtana. Let's say he switched the designation. He did the shechita l'shem oil. Limachshavas psul. On top of that, he had a machshava psul. We know that there's something called machshavas pigel. I'm doing the shechita with the intention of doing the zrika tomorrow. That's not just pus, that's pigel. Pigel has a higher status of psul. If one eats pigel, it's chayav kares. But there's a requirement by pigel. There's a condition. Pigel must be the only fault in the korban. It must be properly executed, except for the pigel machshava. Because if there's any other deficiency in the korban, it doesn't become pigel. We're going to learn this Be'ez Hashem and the Gemara Zvachim. So now the Gemara is going to get involved in that question. Suppose I took my Pesach on Tu B'Shvat, Shloi B'Zmanoi, and I did it l'shem oila, plus I added another machshava. I'm doing l'shem oila, al manas, on condition that I'm going to do the zrika tomorrow, which is machshava's pigel. Does it become pigel or not? So really, it depends on the question that we just discussed. When you take a Pesach, Shloi B'Zmanoi, and you say, I'm doing it l'shem oila, what is the halacha there? We have two cheetahs. If it's kosher, it turns into a shlamim, then when you add a machshavas pigel, it makes it pigel, because there's no other deficiency other than machshavas pigel. That's called pigel. But if you hold like the Chacham and Yisrael, the Inun Amran, they held no. The only time Pesach turns into a shlamim, if you had shlamim in mind, if you had oil in mind, the Pesach is possible. So in this case, if you had that additional machshavas pigel, I'm going to be zerg the dam tomorrow, that's not pigel. Because there's another fault to the korban, aside from the pigel machshava. That can't be pigel. So that's how the Gemara is going to conclude. It's a simple calculation. Hi Chavida, says the Gemara, what exactly did he do here? Shachta l'shem oila. He took the Pesach. He did the shechita for the sake of oila. Al manas lizruk dam l'machar, on condition to do the zrika tomorrow. We come puzzle. Says the Gemara, but either way it's puzzle. Because even if it's not pigel, it's still puzzle. When he had a machshava to do the zrika tomorrow. Says, well, you're right. I know it's possible, but I want to know if it's pigel. Is there any other psul in the carbon aside from the pigel? Well, that depends on our previous discussion. In Tamar, if you'll say mishtana l'machsheves, that when you do the Pesach for the sake of an oila, it is pasul, then it can't become pigel. And we add a word here. Einoi pigel. It's not pigel. Because if it already has a psul aside from the machshavas pigel, that can't become pigel. And here it does, because the Pesach is already pasul because you had oil in mind. That's one approach. But according to the other shita, that a Pesach done l'shem oila is automatically a shlamim, then it's perfectly kosher. And since you had an additional machshava of pigel to do the zrika tomorrow, that is full-fledged pigel. In Tema, if you'll say ein mishtan al machshavas psul, that when you switch it to the oila, it's not pasul. Ein mishtan machshavas pasul. It's actually a carbon kosher because it's a Pesach shaloi l'shmoi and becomes a shlamim. Then yes indeed, pigel. When you had a machshava to do zrika tomorrow, that becomes pigel. So this question really depends on our previous discussion. It says malishmoi v'shaloi l'shmoi b'shai yimos Hashem. Suppose he has his Korban Pesach, it's on Tu B'Shvat. And he did the Shechita for the sake of Pesach and also for the sake of a Yishlam. He had both machshavas in mind. L'shmoi v'shlo l'shmoi, b'shai yimos Hashem. What happens now? On account of the first part of the machshava, l'shmoi should be pasul. You take a Pesach and you do the Shechita l'shem Pesach on Tu B'Shvat, it's pasul. But the fact that you had that additional shaloi l'shmoi element, that's really machshir it. So which one do we follow? Rabbi Bun Bar Chia said in the name of B'Shem Shmo Barab. Mikivin she'ein l'shem, since it has no l'shma, because he had a machshava shaloi l'shma here, it's kosher. Nasu k'sheichet l'shmai, v'shaloi l'shma b'shchita, b'shtika, v'u kosher. It's like a Pesach on Tu B'Shvat, where he does the shchita shaloi l'shmai. The truth is that there is a l'shmai element here. Why? Because every Pesach is meant for Pesach. It's stama for Pesach. It's designated for Pesach. Nevertheless, when you do the shechita shaloi l'shmai, it's machshav the carbon. The shaloi l'shmai overrides the l'shmai aspect. And since it's shaloi l'shmai, now Pesach is kosher. So just as l'shmai b'shtika, meaning when there was no explicit l'shmai, it was implied, it was meant for l'shmai, but then he did a shaloi l'shmai. He does the shechita for the sake of a shlam. The shaloi l'shmai element comes and fixes things up. It overrides and negates the l'shmai, and it's considered a Pesach shaloi l'shmai, therefore it's kosher l'shem shlamim. Here as well, even though he said l'shmai, but since he added shaloi l'shmai as well, the shaloi l'shmai cancels out the l'shmai, it overrides it, and we treat it like a Pesach shaloi l'shmai, which is kosher, it's a shlamim. They told him in Kenu, if that's the case, let's stretch it a bit further. Afilu shachta l'shmai, even in the case where he did the shechita l'shem Pesach, which is a problem. But he added, al manas, with the intent to do the zrika, lizrik damai shaloi l'shmai, to do the zrika shaloi l'shmai. Here it's a bit different because the shaloi l'shmai is far away from the l'shmai. It's relating to a different part of the avodah. Shall we say it can come back and override the l'shmai of the shechita and make it kosher now? Yasa mishar rishona. Shall we view it initially? K'shaycha l'shmai v'shaloi l'shmai b'shtika, like the case of l'shmai shaloi l'shmai b'shtika. The Gemara is simply calling it, using this phrase, l'shmai shaloi l'shmai b'shtika, because that was the father example. That was the catchphrase here. Meaning, your typical Pesach shaloi l'shmai is where there's a shtika of l'shmai, it's meant for l'shmai, and since he added the shaloi l'shmai, it's kosher. And therefore the Gemara says, even if he said l'shmai, but since he added the shaloi l'shmai during that same shechita, it's kosher. Says the Gemara, perhaps we'll take it a step further. In the case where he did the shechita l'shmai, which is problematic, but he did it al manas to do the zrika shaloi l'shmai, that shaloi l'shmai aspect will come back and override, cancel out the l'shmai, even though he's far away, he's by the zrika. Perhaps you can compare the two things, via kosher, and we'll treat it like a Pesach shaloi l'shmai, which is a shlam and kosher. Should we say that? Omar Rabbi Abba Mari, you can't compare the two things. Ma noimar, certainly we say in the first case, bishtika, when the shaloi l'shmai took place during the shechita, it certainly undoes the designation, the lishma designation of the carbon, and therefore it's kosher. Or noimar, but you can't say that nowadays. Bishtika, when the shaloi l'shmai, the zrika, is going to undo the lishma designation of the shechita. Over here, certainly it's too far away from it. possible. And therefore, it's possible because it's considered like Lishmai. A Pesach, Lishmai. Not an Erev Pesach is possible. So in summary, a Pesach Shlei Bizmani, which was Nishchat L'Shem Pesach, is possible. L'Shem Shlamim becomes a Shlamim. What about L'Shem Eila? A Machlekes. Some say it's still kosher because it was not L'Shem Pesach. Others say it's possible because it could only be a Shlamim when you had Shlamim in mind. If you did the Shechita L'Shem Pesach and also Shlei Lishmai, all agree it's kosher. It's a Shlamim. The Shlei Lishmai overrides Lishmai. But if the Shechita was a Shmai, Lizrek Dam Shlei Lishmai, in this case, the Shlei Lishmai doesn't relate to the Shechita, and it remains Lishmai, and it's puzzle. So, in today's daf, we learned about the leftover funds. Sometimes it's chulin, sometimes it's nadava. We learned how the machzah shekel is mechaper for the masa egel. We learned that a Pesach reverts into a shlamim. Kol tov and hatzlach rab.